This episode is sponsored by Lens Protocol. Lens lets you own your own social media presence, easily monetize your content, and carry your social graph with you wherever you go. That means you, the creator, can focus on creating without ever having to worry about losing access to your account or having to build a new following again. Lens also lets you engage more closely with your fans, directly monetize your work, and if you're a dev, easily spin up a new app with Lens's full suite of developer tools. Go to lens.xyz today to claim the last social media handle you'll ever need. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with Kaitlyn Smith, Chief Strategy Officer of Bankless, a crypto media organization that's trying to help the next billion people go bankless. As you'll soon hear in this conversation, Kaitlyn is an ops queen who, prior to working in Web3, worked at BlackRock, Ernst Young, and obtained her MBA from Georgetown. She has a wealth of experience in the hiring and team building space and brings a grounded and sophisticated perspective to the often disorganized and chaotic world of Web3. I think hiring is a really important topic because the people you hire determine the culture and success of your organization, and how happy and motivated you're able to keep your employees after they're hired also contributes to that end state as well. But for some reason, I found hiring to be a seldom discussed topic in Web3, and perhaps the reason why we see such high turnover in this space and easily avoidable mistakes taking place regularly that Kaitlyn and I discuss in this episode, such as companies hiring Twitter personalities for roles that don't exist and probably don't need to exist within their organization. Now, I know that not everybody listening is in an ops role or wants to be in an ops role, but I know that many of you are founders or employees of early stage startups, which means many of you probably have been or are currently in charge of hiring for your organization. You'll want to tune into this conversation as Kaitlyn shares so many great insights from her many years of researching and building high-performing, diverse teams. We, of course, at some point, also ended up talking about mountaineering, which is something both of us love to do. And Kaitlyn shared some of her biggest adventures, misadventures, and learnings, which include learnings on why we need more diversity, not just in Web3, but also in the mountaineering world as well. Kaitlyn is equal parts analytical and empathetic, and her balanced approach to her work and her life is something I really admire, and I can't wait for you all to hear my conversation with her. Kaitlyn was nominated by me, Diana Chen, and voted onto the podcast by Zaji Reyes, LDF, Justin Conley, Aaron Soskin, Triumph, and me. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Kaitlyn. Hey, Kaitlyn, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hey, Diana. Great. So good that we finally make this work.
I know. It's been a bit of a struggle with all your awesome travels and trying to make Wi-Fi work on the road, which I can relate to that struggle so much. But I'm glad that we're finally here and making it happen. I can't wait to talk to you about a bunch of your varied experiences in Web3 so far, mostly in the ops realm and hiring, which is something that I think gets overlooked a lot, but is actually like one of the most crucial parts of a business is hiring, because that determines your team, that determines your whole company culture and how successful you end up being. So I just want to dive right on in. Hiring is, again, one of the most difficult parts of operating a business. So I'm just curious, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your many years of experience hiring for high-performing teams?
Yeah, well, there are so many, but there are two that I'm thinking of in the context of Web3 and in startups generally. So the first one is hire people who are better than you at the thing you're trying to do. And the second is to make sure that you're hiring for the right role. That seems easy, but it's actually one of the things that I see most commonly not followed in Web3. So first, hiring someone who's better than you at the thing you're trying to hire for. Some people might not agree with this because it doesn't leave much room for mentorship. But if you're in a smaller startup, to get a truly high-performing team, you need a team who you can trust and to hire people who bring additional competencies to the table. When you have one center of control, it actually introduces a lot of risk to the business. So bringing in people who are subject matter experts in different areas of the business is not only smarter in terms of reducing risk surface area by centering the control around one person, it also brings more ideas and it creates a richer team experience. So by doing that, you can make everyone else more efficient, reduce risk surface area, and create a richer experience across the board. I think we'll get into diversity and inclusion later, but I'm big in diversity of experience as well. And the greater the diversity of experience, the greater the opportunity is, I think, to create a rich product experience that serves a greater number of people and greater serves people's needs. The more you have groupthink or a center of control that's too narrow, the less likely it is to take into account different perspectives. And then when it comes to hiring for the right role, gosh, I don't know why this is such a problem in Web3, but I've seen time and time again people hiring folks because they're Twitter famous or they did one thing really well. And they think that if they bring them into the team, they'll be able to do something else really well. But it's so important to ensure that you know what you're hiring for and then hire the right person for that thing. And it has to start with knowing what you're hiring for. This sounds so simple, but a lot of teams don't think enough about what exactly they need before posting a position or before interviewing. I'll give you an example. So a solution engineer, for example, is a pretty hot title right now, and they're in demand. It's kind of hard to find them, very specific skill set, but also there's so many different things that a solution engineer could do. So I've hired for this role a couple of times now, and in some organizations, you need someone who's more BD heavy, who needs to be working with bigger clients, have experience with landing larger deals. In others, you might need someone who has more experience building demos. You can, of course, learn either of those skills, but getting back to the first point, if you want to really crush the team dynamics and crush performance, having someone who excels in the thing that you and your organization needs most is so important. And then I think this might be coming from Twitter fame and how much we all live in Twitter, but bringing someone in just because they're an amazing personality sets both parties up for failure. It's kind of sad when you bring someone into an organization hoping that they'll excel without a game plan for them. Someone could be an absolute rock star, but if you don't have the space for them in a role that's the absolute right fit, it's just going to be disappointing for both parties. And of course, if an organization has unlimited resources and can bring in people like that, that's fantastic. But most organizations in Web3 aren't set up for that. We're in a bear market right now. Most likely, people need to conserve resources and have folks who are an absolute right fit. So it's important to get on the same page from the get-go that the person that you're hiring is filling the number one greatest need and then has the capability to learn and grow in other areas that might come secondary to that need.
Why do you think that's the case that, especially in Web3, organizations are so prone to hire for people because they're Twitter famous, for example, instead of for a specific role? Because as you're saying that, even from my personal experience, I can't tell you how many times I've been approached and had conversations with companies that are interested in hiring me. And when I ask, well, what role are you looking for? They're like, whatever you want. Like, how do you think you can contribute? And it's like, it's almost like the question gets flipped back on me, or it's not even a question. It's kind of just like, you can craft whatever role you want. You know, the opportunities are endless. And that can actually sound pretty enticing to somebody who is maybe a self-starter or somebody who has big dreams of making a big impact within an organization. They think, oh, I can go in and I can make all the impact I want because I have so much freedom to kind of do whatever I want and craft whatever role I want. And most of the time, as you were saying, what actually happens is once you get into the organization, you realize, well, this actually isn't the case. I don't have unlimited budget to do all of the things I had in mind. Turns out I have more constraints than was pitched to me. So yeah, like as you're saying that, I'm just thinking in my head, this is too real. I have personally experienced this so many times. But why do you think that's what happens in this Web3 space, especially?
Yeah, it's so funny. I've experienced the same thing. And the way that you describe it as the wealth of opportunity, I love that. It does sound so enticing and it's exciting. I would love an opportunity like that, but it's just not realistic with financial constraints. And I wonder if it's a mix of folks not having enough hiring experience or thinking enough about the bottom line and the company's long-term roadmap. I do think that in Web3, this is going up on a bit of another tangent. There is a lot of chasing product ideas without thinking about the roadmap and the market and what needs to be built next. So with hiring, I wonder if some folks are thinking that people come in and solve some of those problems. Web3 does have a lot of adventurers. That's one of the things that drew me into this field. And with an adventurer's mindset, people do have a way of identifying solutions and thinking about new frontiers and new areas to explore. But at some point, you need to put together a plan for the direction the business is going in if you want to be profitable and if you want something that sticks. It is important to build for the sake of building. We are such a new industry, and building the infrastructure and the foundation is important too. But at some point, these companies need to become profitable. And to do that, to grow, they need to think of a plan for hiring and for their overall roadmap. So yeah, I wonder if it's just we have a lot of dreamers maybe, and people who like to think big and give people a lot of space to contribute. It's kind of similar to the DAO model, I guess, but we do need some structure. And I'm a big believer in the hiring process of ensuring that both parties are very familiar with each other's pitfalls and weaknesses so that you have a good idea going into the company, like you said, of what your constraints are, what kind of things you'll be able to operate in. A person is going to be the best that they can be and the best employee they can be if they're really excited about the work they're doing and working on something they're enthusiastic about. So one of the worst things you can do is bring in someone amazing like you, make these false promises, and then limit your scope of ability of what you can contribute to. As soon as someone starts to become disappointed in the company's mission and their ability to contribute, you've already lost their ability to contribute meaningfully to the team.
That's so true. And I wonder if it's a two-way street too, not to throw all of this on the employer, but on the other side, because there are a lot of dreamers and a lot of self-starters and a lot of highly motivated individuals who do crave that freedom, that companies think they can get away with it because they can, they have over and over again been able to hire for the seemingly most desirable people from crypto Twitter. So it's kind of like this cycle that perpetuates itself because both sides are feeding into it.
Yeah, exactly. Hiring is like dating. And I think it's so important to be honest up front and share what the constraints are, what some of the limitations will be. I share with candidates up front all the time what their struggles will be. And I love when candidates ask that because sometimes I forget. I love when a candidate says, what is going to be I think actually our most recent design hire, D, asked, what is going to be my greatest challenge in my first 30 and 90 days? And I thought that's such a fantastic question because we can open up a dialogue around the things that I'm seeing. The reason I'm hiring her, of course, was to solve some of these problems. So it's important that she's aware of the kinds of things that she's walking into, what kind of problems she'll be tackling and tasked with owning, what her blockers might be. I think that it's coming from a fear-based place that companies don't often share that, but similar to dating, you should know what you're walking into and know what kinds of problems you're walking into because the right candidate will be up for that challenge.
Absolutely. Is this D Thinks Web3?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. We had her on the podcast last season. She's great. So cool that you guys are working together. What a small world.
She's fantastic. She's our most recent design hire, and we are so happy to have her on the Bankless team.
That's incredible. I love that. So another thing I wanted to ask you about is this idea of hiring for a high-performing team. I think when people think high-performing team, people mostly think like the output. Is that how you think about high-performing team, or are there any characteristics of a high-performing team that most people don't think about or would be a little bit more unexpected?
Yeah, well, I think output is more of the KPI. Output is one of the ways you can measure a high-performing team, but there's so many other ways you can measure it. And sometimes it takes a long time to get to a place of output or churn on a product. Well, a team can still be high performing in the meantime. So high performing teams, in my opinion, they vary from organization to organization, from product to product. It's really hard to say what one unifying factor is, but the thing that tends to tie it all together is solid team chemistry. And that cuts across both competency and personality. So there are a couple different frameworks for looking at this. I really like Deloitte's team chemistry, and there are a couple of others that are similar to that. It basically breaks down people's personalities into different quadrants. And the ones that I look at the most are the dreamer doer quadrants, or you have people who are drivers, the folks who get things done, who can be more process oriented, who push for the deadlines. And then you have the dreamers, people who are idea people, maybe more social, sometimes the social glue. They come up with a lot of ideas that could frustrate the process oriented people because sometimes they're thinking so big without a plan. And usually what I found is the teams that are the most high performing have the exact right balance of these two different types of people. Make sure that you have a good mix of each of them and one that's appropriate for the kind of product you're working on. And it really depends on the team and the product, but you can kind of tell when you're missing one of those traits over the other. So for example, I think in Web3, you do tend to see more dreamer-heavy teams without as many process-oriented folks. It does seem like we're starting to introduce more process into the field, but it's common to see orgs that are just spinning their wheels on ideas and not really getting things done, or just like firing in every direction on their roadmap. That would indicate to me that there's lack of a process, and introducing a couple of process-oriented people who are great at organizing could help right that ship. On the other hand, if you have too many process people and not enough dreamers, you might not be thinking big enough, considering all the different options, all the different ways you could do something. If you're too process heavy, there could be a tendency to just forge down the path and reach for completion without pausing to reflect, to think about how to iterate better, how to improve, what to do differently. So it's all about that mix and that dynamic. And then there's, of course, the mix of things that people do really well. So it's almost like a multi-sided matrix where if we're thinking about the product or design functions or the solutions engineer, for example, the smaller the team is, the more you need people who bring these different things to the table. And so each and every hire that I bring into an organization, I'm thinking about their main competency and then other things they can do really well, so that as we grow, they can start to spin things up until we bring on another person. And it's so important to make sure that you have all these different competencies filled and filled by the right people who like doing the thing, who are good at doing the thing. And you're not too heavy in one area and weak in another. If everyone wants to be doing the same thing, there's going to be conflict. If no one wants to do the one thing, there's going to be conflict. So it's all about getting the exact right chemistry across all the different people on board.
I think that speaks really well to being an effective team, like being able to get things done in the most efficient manner. I think also, though, like there's a lot of people's personalities that help shape the culture at the organization. How do you hire for that, or how do you think about that? Do you sort of decide up front, this is the culture that we want to have at the company, or do you just hire who seems to be the right people and then let them help shape whatever the culture ends up being?
I love this question. I think it depends. And I entered Bankless after most of the team was hired. So it's, I guess, a different approach here versus when I was building a team from the ground up. So I would say it is important to set your intention for the culture and for the company's values. And each company's values are going to be a bit different. And then from there, I think about values in a couple of different ways. At Bankless, for example, we of course want Bankless enthusiasts. But there are other ways that people can be values driven and follow Bankless values that fit outside of that standard Bankless enthusiast box. And bringing those people in as well is so important. By bringing in people outside of the typical Bankless enthusiast box, we can get a greater range of personalities, perspectives, more richness to the team chemistry and to our outcomes. So in that situation, some of the things I look for are a passion for our ultimate purpose. And if you look outside of Bankless, it's education, pushing Web3 to broader audiences. Bankless is very trusted. So people who care about the truth, journalistic integrity, about covering things in a way that's, although some people would call us out for this, not pushing bags. So you want to have a good mix of the enthusiasts for the product and the thing you're building, and then enthusiasts for the values and things that the company stands for. And I think both work, and you need a mix of both of those things to make a company that really makes sense. If you were hiring just one or just the other, your search would probably be too narrow, and you'd end up being overbalanced in one way over the other.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask about is specifically related to this Web3 space, but also just this work from home culture in general now. How do you hire for work-life balance? Like, how do you hire people who are going to perform at a high level, but also have that work-life balance? And I'm asking you specifically because I know you're really good at this. Like, you're also really into being outside, and you're a mountain girly like me, and we kind of like to have our physical lives in addition to our digital lives. So I'm just curious, in your hiring process, how do you think about this? What are some good ways to communicate to candidates that this is a value that the organization has? And then how do you force people to actually do it?
I think we have similar views on this. I agree with a lot of what you said. It is easier for me because I come from a consulting background where I was working 80-hour weeks, and I really hit my breaking point before I got to this place. So I think hitting a breaking point made me realize how unsustainable that is. And it's just not smart. When someone's working that much, it's harder to bring some of that dreamer energy and to think about things holistically. Burnout, it's risky. It's risky for the culture. It's risky for the individual. And I would never want to lose anyone on our team because they're too burnt out. The people make the company, not the other way around. And it's so important to protect people's time. So it is one of our values at Bankless. You ask, though, how we create it and hire for it. It's so hard in Web3. It is a lot easier in consulting, for example, because everyone is so used to working 80 hours. That's what the expectation is. And then it becomes your job to force people to take off. And I think when I was in that situation, it was more common for me to tell my team, you have to take off at least 2 weeks this year. If you don't, I'm just going to start blocking off your calendar. So you better pick some days yourself. We did have that once on our team recently. We have some very hard workers at Bankless, and we have to encourage them sometimes to take some time. The team is also very scrappy and cares a lot about the product, which is a great thing. And I think that is an easier way of doing things, of finding someone who is so dedicated, so motivated by the product and its success and the outcomes of the team as a whole. It's a bit easier to hire for that and then encourage those people to take off and set the conditions for them to be able to take off. Because it's one thing to say, oh, you should take off. And then if you keep piling work on them and piling deadlines, targets, then it's impossible to actually do so. You need to set the culture across the entire organization. So it's important for me, Ryan, David, Rachel, our COO, to all follow our values when we're off, to signal that we're off, to not be sending things on the weekends or on holidays, to try our best not to ping people when they're off, and create a game plan before someone takes off so that we have coverage for everything. We don't have to ping them. But yeah, hiring in Web3, we do have a lot of travelers, the conferencers. I haven't had many issues. I think generally, if you find someone who's passionate, it wouldn't be an issue. And I tend to filter out for folks who aren't really passionate about the mission in one way or another. But this does become more risky, I think, if you're hiring for a personality, because if the personality and someone's personal brand is coming before the company's mission, those two things might be in conflict. So if you get the values alignment right, then it's all about protecting their time and ensuring that they have what they need to get their work done and to take time off.
I want to go back to something you kind of started talking about earlier, which is diversity in hiring. This is obviously something that's extremely important, but I'd love to hear just your perspective on why you think diversity is so important in hiring.
It's important across the board. We just need to do better. Everyone needs to do better. But Web3 in particular, I was so excited to join Web3 because it seemed like a great opportunity for us to start fresh. We have the means to start this industry. There's so much shared values alignment across the industry, people who believe in the same things. And yet we're falling into the same traps, if not worse, as all of the tech companies, the finance companies. If you look at these organizations, they're still so white male dominated. And that happens when people aren't paying attention, when people aren't putting any effort into creating more diverse organizations. That is why we have so many programs. Well, we used to have affirmative action. That's the way we have so many programs like that. There are years and years of racism and sexism that have created inequality across organizations, across institutions, and it takes effort to unwind those things. It is everyone's duty to make a space in organizations for people of all sorts. And I care about this personally. I think that everyone should, but it's also a good business idea. So if that's what people need to hear in order to be convinced, organizations with more diversity, with more women, more people of color, they perform better. They can better understand a greater range of consumers. They can come up with a better range of business ideas and outcomes. And it's a shame that we even have to say that, but it affects the bottom line and it affects our ability to be a more fair and just society. And I'm disappointed in Web3's progress so far on that front.
I love your framing of that because there are a lot of people in Web3 still who don't understand why diversity is important. I want to say it was Uniswap last year or a couple years ago that released a stat that something like 50% of their employees were women, something like that. That was celebrating diversity. And I was reading through the comments on that post on Twitter, and so many comments were just criticizing them for you're just hiring women over men. You don't even care about hiring the best talent. And I think a lot of that is obviously, I think, just ignorant of how the world actually works and about our history. So yes, as much as it sounds, I don't know, crass is maybe the right word to talk about diversity from a business perspective. You should hire for diversity because it's good for your business. I think that is what some people need to hear because they can't accept all the other reasons why we need to hire for diversity.
And that example you gave, it makes me laugh. It's so ironic because think about every other company that is a majority white male dominated. That's just not what our college classrooms look like. That's not what our society looks like. And so to think that an organization that's 75% white male happened naturally without any bias or preferential treatment towards white men is so ridiculous. Of course, that people tend to hire people who look like them. People tend to surround themselves with people who look like them. There's so much research on people with managers who are like them getting better raises. It tends to happen most actually with men with male managers. I think it's something like, I don't want to mess up the stat, but they have a significant increase in the amount of raises that they get over women and people of color if they have a male manager. This happens time and time again. And if you're reviewing a resume and it looks like your own background and something you can relate to, you're going to be more likely to hire that person. And we really need to check our bias from the get-go and think about what kinds of opportunities certain people have had to get them to the place that they are that might make them appear to be a better fit than other candidates who could actually be a better fit.
And when we talk about diversity too, it's not just about demographics, it's also about diversity of experience, which is something you brought up earlier. Can you talk more about how you think about measuring diversity in all different contexts when you're hiring?
Yeah, there's diversity of thought, diversity of experience. So So I actually come from a research background. And before I went to business school, I was thinking of getting my PhD. And I did some research as I was finishing my undergrad program on name bias. I worked at a writing center as a writing tutor and was working on presenting this academic research on the effect of ethnically identifying names on booking frequency. So basically, if you have a name that sounds white, you were booked 3 times more frequently than if you had a name that sounded non-white. There's a ton of research on resumes to the same extent. So that's just one of the many factors around how our bias shows up. It starts with the name at the top of the resume and it goes throughout. There's bias around colleges, around schools people go to, places they grow up, the experiences they have. And I try to check all of those things and think about what's my bias and what's actually a limiting factor here. And a candidate could be more impressive going to a worse school than to an Ivy League because it can sometimes show how they've worked their way up and it can show effort and tenacity. So I try to, demise of my own schedule, interview as much as possible and interview candidates who come from a variety of backgrounds and whose resumes might speak to skills that are slightly outside of what we're looking for. And that's actually the advice I would give to most companies is we're not giving preferential treatment. And I'm sure that Uniswap wasn't either. The most important thing is to ensure that you're talking to enough people, talking to a greater diversity of people, bringing them all in. And at that point, the skills often show through. But the hardest thing is to get your foot in the door. Women tend to underrepresent their skills in their resumes and men tend to overrepresent their skills in their resumes. So if you're just looking at face value, you're probably not accurately assessing the qualities of 2 different candidates. I think there's something around this with minorities as well, that they tend to not speak themselves up as much in job applications. So I will look at different factors. And there have been a couple of instances where someone's come from a non-traditional background. And I know I said earlier, hire someone who's better at you than the thing that you're doing. Sometimes on paper, that won't show through. You can kind of tell from the story that a person is telling what their skill set is, what their trajectory is, and how they might play into the org. And if you're thinking about the whole team chemistry and the thing that you need might show through in different ways, in different skill sets. I actually hired a new designer at the last org who came from a very non-traditional background, but his values were so aligned with the company. And what showed through the most for me was his ability to learn and to be dedicated to the mission, dedicated to his approach to figuring things out, which at the time is what we really needed for that particular position.
As you were saying that, it just reminded me of a tweet I saw recently from David Phelps. He tweeted, met a few Web3 engineers concerned they're too junior. Thoughts: 1, they're all women. You never hear men say this. And that concern means they spend all their time self-training. And 2, everyone should hire junior devs who won't leave because they want to scale up their skills over the years. So yeah, like that first point is like women are sitting around being worried if they should even apply. It does start from the ground up, right? Like probably so many women don't even apply for positions that they think are slightly out of reach because they're worried that they're not qualified for it and they're not going to get selected. And so you have fewer applications from women even coming in. And then once it does go in and it reaches the company, and then from the company side, there's all sorts of biases that happen at that stage. And every stage, it just whittles down the candidate pool of women and minorities until the people that actually make it through all happen to be white men because of so many factors that happen along the way.
And they're recruited more. White men tend to be recruited more often because they're the people, if companies are run by a certain type of people, they're more likely to recruit people who are like them and who they relate with, people who they have more shared experiences with. This is like the classic boys club mentality, not the fun Web3 boys club that we know and love, but the old school hiring your bro who you know through golf. It's still happening. It's happening in Web3 all over the place. And we really need to recruit more and welcome more people into the door. I've been doing a lot of hunting for women and people of color. It's challenging. And I have this awesome recruiter who helps on that front as well. But it is tough. The last org that we started from the get-go hiring with diversity in mind and had an extremely diverse team. It was around 50% female, extremely diverse racially, from a variety of experiences. It is tough when you don't start thinking about it until later because there are a bunch of stats around, of course, women and people of color not wanting to be the token person on the team. If you're looking from the outside, it's hard to know what kind of adversity you're going to face. So it's up to companies to create a safe space, to think about that from the beginning, and then to create the conditions for people to thrive within the organization and to feel safe.
Do you have any, just off the top of your head, do you have any resources you can throw out for people that are looking to make the effort to hire a diverse team? Like, where do you go to search for women and people of color and other underrepresented groups?
All over the place. So first, I review every single application that comes into Bankless, everyone. And I really really look at all of them. And if someone seems like they're underselling themselves and they're worth a conversation, I will always talk to them. And then I reach out to a bunch of groups. So there's Boys Club, of course, Lauren Feld's group, The Collective. I've been posting in there. I reach out to women within my group, which I think has been really helpful. Women tend to help each other a lot. We've been through it. We know what it's like. And there's a great network effect. So I do see that more often of folks have been passing me other people's resumes because they know that I'm often looking or posting on socials. And I have this fantastic recruiter. His name's Connor. I think he's with Proof of Talent now. And I scared him a bit. The last org I was working with, he sent me a batch of resumes and I said, don't send me a batch like this again unless there's at least 25% women. Even if this is an engineering role, I'm sure you can find at least that. And he rise to the challenge. Did such a great job. And he's done a fantastic job of hunting for diverse candidates. But that's the thing. Sometimes you do need to go out there and look, because if someone doesn't think that they're the right fit for the job, if they don't feel welcome or they're going to fit within the organization or they're qualified enough, they might not apply. And it sometimes takes more outreach than what you might otherwise have to do.
Kudos to you for advocating for women in that way, just by telling the recruiter, like in the future, like, don't send me a batch of all white male candidates. Like, you got to give me something better than that. You can work for yourself without doing it by yourself. As a freelancer or independent worker, you're constantly engaging your network and updating your professional profile, but the tools we use to do this haven't evolved in the last 20 years. Quest makes it easier than ever to gather support for a new idea, broadcast updates to your network, and showcase your best work on your profile. It's one link for who you are and what you do. Sign up at rehash.quest.com to follow along with our quest so you never miss an episode, or create your own quest today. So changing gears a little bit, I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about design thinking, because this is something that I know you spend a lot of your time thinking about. So when we're talking about design thinking, what are we even referring to? Like, what are the core components we're talking about there?
So design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation, and it basically integrates the needs of users, the capabilities of technology, and your goals. So I actually just did a design thinking exercise with the team earlier today. We use it for our OKRs. And the basic premise is that you're using these different tools and almost workshops or exercises to break down problems into component parts, understand all the different areas of a problem, the pain points, and then the user needs, the team needs, the market needs, so you can come to a better understanding of the problem. So this gets back to, I think we were speaking about this earlier, maybe we were on Twitter. In Web3, we see a lot of big ideas without thinking about the execution or without thinking about whether a user and whether the population actually wants those things. One of the things that design thinking does really well is explore all of those different areas. So, for example, one of the ways that I've been using it most at Bankless is I'm on the fence about OKRs. For a while, I hated them. We've been using them recently, and they've been fantastic for the team. We've been nailing our OKRs. We just did one for our alpha team, which is the newsletter and analyst team. And we do this essentially a retro, but it's like an interactive retro where you look at what went well last quarter, what could we do better? What's like the red zone? What are we not doing well? And then what is something that we could do differently? And we go through each area without talking about it. In design thinking, you'll see a lot of sticky notes and people thinking in their own silo. And the idea there is to get everyone's individual thoughts out on paper so that groupthink doesn't arise. That's how you come up with a greater wealth of ideas. And usually you'll start to see little themes appearing across the board. So in the area of things that didn't go well, one thing is that we learned that our content isn't as accessible on the website, and that a couple of folks on the team had ideas around creating more interactive content, more guides for users who are in the beginning of their learning journey. And from there, we take it and we turn those into OKRs. So we look at the things that aren't going as well. We look at everyone's ideas and then start to pair those with our business goals and see what we want to try this quarter, what things we want to tackle, and which ones we want to save for later.
I really like that strategy of starting with the things that aren't going well and using that to help shape what your OKRs are, and OKRs, objectives and key results, for anybody who's not familiar with the corporate lingo. So from your experience working with the Bankless team so far, have you identified any areas of Web3 media specifically that you think are more worthwhile and valuable to invest more of our time and thought and to experiment more with?
Wow. Yeah, this is such a tough question because there's Bankless and there's the industry as a whole. And I'm a big believer in trying everything and trying everything once. There are some things that I have maybe a lower confidence interval on for our team, but I think are worth experimenting with. So podcast NFTs, for example, we're starting to dabble there. Is that where I would put all of our investment? Probably not, but it's definitely worth exploring. And I think that we have to start overturning some of these stones and seeing what the next thing might be and what people might want and learning about how to best interact with these different mediums. So I'd say the industry as a whole, we're so young that we should be doing everything and trying all of it. For Bankless, one thing that we need to work on, and I think actually the industry as a whole, is more intro level content, especially during the bear market. The general public is really turned off of crypto, and the people who are around now, they care. They're in it. They're following our content. But it's a tough time to recruit folks. And if we can do it now, then we can do it anytime. So we're working on some ways to try and get the general public more involved, to create content to make things more accessible. Voice Club does this really well, actually, recruiting new folks into Web3. And then I think we just need more podcasts, more content. Of course, we don't want more competitors necessarily, but I think that we're so early that creating a bigger pie is in everyone's best interest right now. And so I don't think of it as more competitors. I think of more players in this space, and creating a greater marketplace as a whole for this type of content is what's most important.
I completely agree. I have people ask me all the time, don't you think we have enough podcasts? Do we really need another crypto podcast? And I'm like, yes, we need more crypto podcasts. We need more crypto content in general until this has reached the mainstream, which we're not even close. We need more content because clearly whatever content we're making isn't getting out there. It's staying in this little bubble. And until somebody figures out how to seep into the mainstream, which I think, like you said, organizations like Voice Club is doing a really good job of, I think we have more work to do. I also think it's interesting that you say we need more beginner level onboarding content in the bear market, because I've actually been thinking about it the other way around. I was thinking during the bull run where you're attracting all of these newcomers into the space, that's when there's a big focus on beginner level one-on-one content, because you have all of these newcomers to the space who need that content in order to keep them around. Whereas during the bull run, like you said, most of the people that are still around right now are people who've been here for a little while. And so in my head, less of an emphasis on the beginner level content. I think my thinking has shifted during the bear market to focusing more on how can we paint Web3 and crypto within the bigger picture of tech, instead of in this little silo as Web3 versus Web2, which is what I feel like the dialogue really was back in the bull market. Everything was like, this has to be Web3, it has to be fully decentralized, or else it's the worst. And if you even dare to pursue it, then you're just not staying true to Web3. You're not a true believer. You're not a purist, and therefore you're no good and get out of here. So yeah, it is interesting to me to see how that's shifted, and also to hear different ways of approaching that and thinking about how the market has really affected the way we think about content within the space.
You really hit the nail on the head. I completely agree with all of that. So I guess now it's more, what kind of new beginner content do we need to be creating during the bear market? We need to do a better job of understanding how to bring people in. And I'm in full agreement. The Bankless team is in full agreement. We need to think about this in the context of other industries as well, and create content and help people understand how Web3 can be the backbone to all this other technological advancement. David actually was just working on a series when he was at Zuzalu that's kind of along these same lines, which is why I'm smiling so much. They've really explored how crypto could be the foundation for so many other things. And that is something that I hope that we can reach the general public with.
Last thing I wanted to ask you is, now with your new role as Chief Strategy Officer at Bankless, first of all, I guess I'm interested to hear, what is the role of a Chief Strategy Officer? Because I guess I'm not very familiar. And then what are you most excited to accomplish in your role as CSO at Bankless?
You know, I think CSO, my take is that it's at an org this size, very organization dependent, and they're kind of filling in some of the gaps. So I was formerly the COO of another org, often in operational roles, and we have a COO at Bankless. We're playing different operational parts, and both have plenty to do on the team. I would say a lot of what I do is managing the high performing team and managing the hiring, the team performance, setting the KPIs, the OKRs, and helping direct the team in the direction that we need to go in. Bankless has grown a lot. I think that a lot of people think of Bankless as just Ryan and David, and Bankless is the world that they created. And the podcast is still a huge part of our business. It's probably the heart of Bankless, but we have so much more than that now. We added the newsletter, and now we have a full-blown product team, and then two other arms of the Bankless Bankless. We have Bankless Ventures and Bankless Labs. So there's a lot going on. So I guess that's the strategic piece is we have a lot going on and a lot of pieces to fit together. And on a day-to-day basis, I'm thinking about how can we fit all these things together? How can we achieve our goals? Stay true to Bankless, continue growing this business, and make sure that everyone in the company is working towards those goals effectively. We have a fantastic team. I'm so lucky to work alongside Ryan and David and Rachel and the rest of the team. And then as for what I'm most excited about, the team has grown so much over the past year, and I get most excited about high-performing teams, as you know. This one is really fun, though, because it's almost like working with 3 or 4 different teams. We have the newsletter alpha team, the podcasting team, the product team, and a lot of what we're working on right now is augmenting the podcast and the newsletter with more ways of learning and experiencing Bankless and experiencing our product. So we started to build out the product feature. We built out our token hub recently, which gives people a new way of reading token analysis and ratings. We're working on a couple of other features that are going to help people along their Bankless journeys. And I'm excited to grow the company and to bring new people in. Our mission is to help 1 billion people go Bankless. And it's great working for an organization that's so easily mission aligned that we can get everyone behind that and then tackle it in a variety of ways. I often get asked by candidates, what's the 5-year goal for Bankless? And I really struggle with that because I think that a successful company is adaptive to the marketplace, adaptive to people's needs, and can also get ahead of them. And so it's tough to say what we'll be doing in 5 years because we're growing so rapidly already. We're right now brainstorming what we could be doing differently in a few weeks, in a few months, next year. And the rate of change, I think, is going to be exponential.
I can't wait to see what you guys cook up. I also think you have such a unique skill set. You were saying earlier how there haven't been too many ops people in the Web3 space. And I think you're like the ops queen. And for you to be in this space, I think it's invaluable for Bankless to have you on their team now. And it's an invaluable skill set that you can offer to Web3 in general, because that is not an easy task, managing so many different pieces and keeping track of everything and making sure that everything is working well individually and together as a whole. It's not something I could do, that's for sure. So I really admire that you have that skill set.
Thank you. That's such a great compliment. We need more ops queens. And also the Bankless team is just a dream to work with. So it makes my job fun.
That's so great to hear. So this is just a bonus question that I have for you, not related to crypto. This is related to your physical life as not just an ops queen, but a nature mountain queen as well. I'm curious personally, what has been your favorite mountain adventure and what is your top bucket list mountain adventure that you haven't done yet?
Great question. Okay, I'm going to cheat and give you 2 favorites. I got started with mountaineering by doing Kilimanjaro. 3 years and some change ago. Oh my gosh. So I think Kilimanjaro is one of those make or break mountains. Either people do it and they've kind of had enough, or you do it and you're like, oh wow, I'm going to learn how to do crevasse training. I'm going to get out there. It's going to change my life. I was the latter. I did that. I signed up for my crevasse rescue training and things just launched off. It's just a beautiful mountain. I did it with a bunch of friends over New Year's in 2020. So it was a fantastic experience. After that, I went to Ecuador and climbed my new highest mountain and a couple of others. And my favorite was actually Antisana, which was not the new highest. It's just a gorgeous mountain, very technically challenging, tons of crevasses, ice falls everywhere. It's so beautiful. And it was really fun pushing the limits of my experience and watching how skilled the guides are in that area. They know the mountain like the back of their hand, and their ability to navigate on a glacier that's constantly changing in that particular way. The snow bridges are collapsing. The conditions are changing. We had a whiteout for a couple of hours. Was such a cool experience for me to watch and so inspiring for me to up-level my own skill set. And what I want to do next, well, I'm signed up for some amazing experiences this year. I'm doing Mont Blanc and Matterhorn right after ECC. Super scared of Matterhorn, so we'll see how that goes. And I'm doing Aconcagua, which I was telling you before we started recording, I've signed up for the past 3 years and it kept getting canceled. So I think this is the year. On my bucket list that I haven't signed up for is Denali for sure. I think we're both kind of small girlies and carrying 100 pounds. It's not going to be easy. Camping in the snow for 2 to 3 weeks, not easy. It would definitely be out of my comfort zone. So I'm looking forward to that one, hopefully in 2024.
So cool. I think you're like way more badass than I am. And going back to the Kilimanjaro thing, I did that back in early 2018. And I was definitely in the former camp of I had some PTSD after that and was like, I can't think about this for a while. And it wasn't until this year that I took took like a full-on mountaineering course, learned crevasse rescue, did all of that. So it took me, 5 years to finally like get over that and get into it. And now I am like, I love it, but it definitely wasn't like I did Kilimanjaro and I was like, this is it for me. This is how I want to live my life. It was kind of like, wow, that was a really cool experience and a really cool accomplishment. I also have like PTSD now from all of that. So I'm just not going to think about this for a little bit. And, in the meantime, like did other smaller adventures like Patagonia and more like hiking and backpacking that didn't involve putting my life in danger with falling into a crevasse or having to learn technical skills of glacier travel and things like that. But here we are now. And Aconcagua is on my list too. I think that's something I would love to do one day. I would love to be able to do it unguided is really like my dream because, partly because it is so expensive to do with a guide. On the super cheap end is at least like a few grand. And on average, people I think pay like $5,000 or $6,000.
I'm on the super cheap end, but the logistics of doing it solo, if something goes wrong, it's a tough mountain to be on. It takes you a while to get down it. I would love to do that one solo. We should do something. I think all the things you're doing are super badass as well. Mountaineering is often, it's all of those things. It's the grass rescue, it's rock climbing, backcountry skiing. And I had a similar experience after that training. I did Rainier with one of my friends and we had such a dangerous experience.
What happened?
We broke up from the group. We were going to be a team of 5 going up the classic ski route on Rainier that's less traveled. There was a huge crevasse. We would have had to ice climb part of it. I didn't know how to ice climb at the time. So speaking of diversity, teams that have 2 or more women on them tend to have a greater rate of safety, so a lower incident rate than all male teams. And I saw this firsthand. I was the only woman on this team of, I think, 5 or 6. And I wouldn't go up it. I said, I'm not going. If anyone wants to go with me up the standard route, let's do that because this is just, we're not going to be able to cross it. There's no way. This is going to be impossible on foot. The ski team attempted it. They got into such a bad fight that they all broke up as friends. They couldn't make it. Super dangerous. But then me and my partner who went up the other route, he was very fast and light, didn't bring enough food, didn't bring enough water. And then we were really quick. We passed every other team on the way up, got lost on the way down, ended up over this huge crevasse field. The snow was super slushy, couldn't get out of it. And then I didn't do mountaineering for a year after that. That was 2 years ago. And then I finally got back into it last fall. But it took me a year to warm up to it again.
I don't blame you. That's a horrible experience. And honestly, I think before I took this mountaineering class, I was like, mountaineers are kind of exclusive, and I took that as, oh, they're like so arrogant. They are so selective about who they climb with, and they're so not open and welcoming to newcomers. And after taking this class, I fully understand why that is. When you're doing really risky things like that, you can't have people on your team who are a liability. You need to like make sure that you trust everyone. Like you were saying, your group on Rainier got into a big fight. They clearly weren't on the same page, didn't probably communicate what their goals were and what their risk tolerance was before the climb, and ended up in a situation where no one was agreeing on what to do next. And that's life or death on the mountain.
Right. A lot of friends ask me to take them up and I won't. I have a good climbing crew now who I trust. We've climbed in Ecuador together. We just did Baker and Adams. And I understand the exclusivity. It is frustrating as a woman because I think in Washington it's easier to find, but sometimes I'm like, it'd be nice to have another woman on my climbing team.
Hit me up anytime. I actually have so many people message me on Instagram because I'm always posting these stories from the mountains and I'm always out there with my girlfriends. And everyone's like, how do you find so many girls to like do these badass things with? And I'm like, I don't know. They're everywhere. My friends who just did Glacier Peak that I was telling you about, it was a group of 4 girls. So many adventures I have are like all girl teams or like 50-50 girl and guy.
It's kind of like what you were saying earlier with the companies. Once you get it started and get the ball rolling and start finding other chicks and organizations or teams that have other chicks on it, it just becomes easier and easier and easier. It's a way easier sell.
Exactly. I love how we tied this mountain conversation back into what we were talking about earlier. That's so great. This last segment, explain your tweet. This is where I just pull some fun tweets. You don't have too many juicy tweets, so I kind of had to dig a little bit, but I did find one that was timely just for ETHCC coming up very soon. You had a tweet from back in July of 2022, so a year ago. You said, pick your boost type, ETHCC Paris edition, and it's unlimited water, Uber always under 5 minutes away, or perfect schedule coordination. And that's so funny, especially like the water conversation. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday where somebody just got back from Europe and the other guy was asking like, how do Europeans hydrate? They have these tiny little cups and then you pay the same amount for water as you do for like an alcoholic beverage. How do you stay hydrated?
Yeah. And when you go to a restaurant and you're like, please more water.
Yeah.
Yeah, ETC is a mess. Any crypto conference, I'm always trying to coordinate with my friends and other teams. And I wish we had an overarching body that would coordinate all of these events. How amazing would it be if rather than having 7 events all overlapping, we could, I don't know, schedule them at different times. I'm glad that's the one you picked. I'm not a big tweeter. I only log in, admittedly, if I'm looking for applicants usually. Crypto Twitter stresses me out, not gonna lie. I'm glad Ryan and David absolutely crush it. We have a social team at Bankless who crushes it. I'll lurk, I review those, and then I stay out of it.
Well, you did have a good one that I pulled too from last year. It was Web3 design thesis is basically digital lava lamps.
Hot take. It's actually really funny how we've strayed away from the Steve Jobs Apple design of minimalism to like those big blobs of color, the very futuristic design. It has been an interesting departure. And yet, I just don't know what a lot of these companies are trying to say to me through their designs. It's like futurism, but it's not really clear what the design thesis is beyond that.
I'm not sure they have one. I'm not sure they know what they're trying to say through their designs either.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That is, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kaitlyn, for taking the time out of your busy travel schedule to record this with me and to share all your insights about hiring and diversity and design thinking in Web3 media with all of us. Before you go, just tell people where they can find you, and also feel free to plug away at any Bankless stuff that you'd like people to check out.
Yeah, check out Bankless. We're on YouTube, of course. We also have an RSS feed, and Twitter is kind of the Bankless home, but we're getting more active on TikTok and Instagram. We have a couple of folks on the Bankless team who've been contributing to our reels lately, so you can start to meet more of the Bankless team beyond David and Ryan if you head over there. You can find me on Twitter at the Kate Smith, but please don't. I'm not super active there. I'm on Instagram as Kaitlyn Smith, my name, and yeah, Telegram, all the other places that Web3 people live. You can find me. I can link all of my socials.
Yeah, send them to me and I'll link them in the show notes. Also, I think that's the first anti-plug we've heard on the podcast. Here's my Twitter. Please don't follow me. That's actually a good strategy because, you know, when you tell people not to do something, they're more likely to do it. So I see what you're doing there.
Strategic. Chief Strategy Officer.
There you go. Exactly. Thank you, Kaitlyn, so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And we'll be back again next Thursday with another episode of Rehash.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Diana Chen, and sponsored by Lens, LivePeer, Quest, and Lore. Rehash is also supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. To learn more about how to become a guest on the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/podcast. And to learn more about sponsoring the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/sponsor. Finally, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Lens at rehash.lens. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Have you ever wanted to buy an NFT with a group of friends, crowdfund a project, or start a collective, and found yourself stitching together tools manually to help you make your dreams a reality? I certainly have, and that's why I'm excited to tell you about Lore, the Web3 co-ownership platform. Lore lets you seamlessly spin up a shared wallet, pool resources, and coordinate group activity, all in one unified experience. Connect to dApps and make any transaction multiplayer. What you can do together is endless. Go to lore.xyz/rehash and start a collective today.